Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Another magnificent day in New Hampshire. It's a very pretty town. This evening I'm going to be talking to you about the capital of the human body, the headquarters, which is the brain. Everything that affects the body affects the brain, and everything that affects the brain affects the body. You can't separate it. And often people try to separate it, but you can't do that. Everything that you eat, drink, whatever, affects the brain, and I'm going to be talking about in the first part of the lecture tonight. And on the other hand, the way we think and the way we speak even affects the way our brain functions and thus the rest of the body. So we're going to begin by looking at the brain. And this is the brain from side on. Looks a little bit like a slug. And looking at the brain from the top down, it looks a little bit like a walnut. So there are two lobes. In fact, if you want to know what the brain looks like, look at a walnut. And in the front of the brain, you'll find two lobes. Medicine calls these two lobes the frontal lobe, referring to them as if they are one. Because the fact is, both lobes have the same function. It's a very important part of the brain, the frontal lobe, because it is in the frontal lobe where our reasoning powers reside. It's in the frontal lobe part of the brain where judgment takes place. In the frontal lobe part of the brain is where our intellect is. And the fourth function of the frontal lobe, I consider one of the most important gifts that God gave to mankind. It is the will. The will is the governing power in the nature of man. It is the power of decision or of choice. And when you think about it, everything depends on the right action of the will. The power of choice God gave to mankind. And you can see by the other functions of the frontal lobe that it was God's design that every decision we make be made according to reason, judgment, and intellect. Now, in the brain, the frontal lobe takes up approximately 33%. But in some brains, it can get up to 38%. So the frontal lobe basically is the front third of the brain. In a monkey, frontal lobe takes up approximately 17% of the brain. In a dog, 7.5%. And in the cat, any guesses on the cat? 12. One lady said, 1? Another lady said, not my cat. Well, I guess if human beings, you can have a difference, 33 to 38% of the brain, I guess there can be a development of any creature's brain. It is in the frontal lobe part of the brain where our foresight is. It's in the frontal lobe part of the brain where our self-control is, where our morals are. And the frontal lobe is fully developed at the age of 30. There are many cultures where the young people are not given positions of responsibility until the age of 30. And if you read the Bible account of Jesus' life, you will discover he began his ministry at the age of 30, frontal lobe fully developed. I remember my son Peter at the age of 25, he made a silly decision. I said, "What are you doing, Peter?" He said, "My frontal lobe's not fully developed, Mum." I said, "Yes, that's why you need your mother." And that's why I say to parents, bind your children to your heart when they're young, so that they will make you their counsellor and guide as they go through those teenage 20s years when they need someone with a fully developed frontal lobe. So why is there a difference in the human brain? 33 to 38%. Well, the mind and the nerves gain tone and strength through the exercise of the will. The will is not a muscle, but it is just like a muscle because the more it is used, the stronger it gets. And in homes where children are brought up with the hedge of safety around the home, frontal lobe can develop even at a young age. What's the hedge of safety? It's guidelines, limits. And let's say a parent says to a child, you can go anywhere in this room but not onto that table. What's the first thing they do? Go on the table, and they're looking straight at you. Why they're looking straight at you? They want to know if what you said is true. They want to know what happens when they go on this table. So I say to parents, don't disappoint them. And if the parent says, I've told you not to go on the table, you know what the child says to themselves? That didn't hurt. So they go a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. And the parent often gets to the point where they go, I told you not to go on the table, whack, 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 blah, blah, blah. Do you know, it would be far kinder for the child if when they put their little finger on that table, there was a consequence. Whatever the consequence. It's got to be something that's a little bit painful or it will just be done again. It's like you touch a fire, it'll burn very badly, so I can promise you no one will touch that fire again. It's as simple as that. My husband says every now and then the cows touch the electric fence to see if it's still on. Don't disappoint them. They're guidelines. And in homes where children know their limits, there are consequences when they step outside them, so that they don't want to step outside the limits again. Frontal lobe strengthens. Most people don't start at a young enough age. I'll give you a story that happened with my grandson, Sonny. My grandson, Sonny, had a gluten and a dairy intolerance. He was getting thinner and thinner at 5 months of age because his mother was eating the gluten and the dairy. So I said, try him. I said to the mother, stop all the gluten and the dairy, but she found that difficult. And so one night, my son, in desperation, because he used to say to me, Mum, babies cry a lot, I said, no, they don't. There's something wrong. There's something wrong if a baby is crying all the time. So he went out in desperation and got a milk that was no dairy, no gluten, fed it to the baby. The baby drank it as if the baby hadn't been fed for a month. And so they put the baby on goat's milk and the baby just thrived. So I visited a couple of months after this, and my daughter-in-law, Nikki, she made up the bottle, laid the baby on the lounge and gave him the bottle. He's 10 months of age. I said, oh dear, can I feed the baby? How I love babies. And when you're feeding a baby, what do you say to the baby? Oh, you are so beautiful. You are the most beautiful baby on the planet. And I'm talking and smiling to my grandson like this, and he's sucking away. And then he started to push me. He started to poke me, and it hurt. And so I put my head away, and I kept it away for 15 seconds. What does he want? He wants me saying, oh, you are so lovely. And so I kept it away for 15 seconds. I came back with a smile. Do you know what the smile said? I love you. What did my head being away told that baby? This is unacceptable behaviour. So I started again. Oh, you are so beautiful. After about a minute, he started to poke and push again. And now I realised why my daughter-in-law was putting him on the lounge. Because this is what he did. And he got lots of funny reactions when he did that. Can you see that's all babies are doing? This time I kept my head away for 30 seconds. I could feel him getting uncomfortable. What does he want? He wants my attention. So when I could feel him getting really not liking this, I came around with a smile, and again, you are so beautiful, etc., etc. He was okay for about another 30 seconds, then he tried it again. This time, when I put my head around, I did it almost a minute. Well, he was nearly beside himself. I could feel I'm holding him. I came back with a smile. He never did it again. Can you see? A 10-month-old baby's frontal lobe is not very big, but the guidelines can still be put down. I breastfed my last baby till he was 3 years of age. And I've seen some toddlers feeding and they come up anytime, night or day, pull up the mother's whole top and want to do whatever they want with those feeding machines. And it's very embarrassing for the mother. Oh, that never happened with mine. Can you see it's very important for the mothers to lay down guidelines. When you lay guidelines down at a very young age, it makes it so easy. So much easier. And then, of course, if the guidelines aren't laid down and the children get established in some adverse habits, then it gets harder and harder and harder. But that frontal lobe can be strengthened and developed from a young age by showing the child guidelines and having consequences when the guidelines are stepped over. That strengthens frontal lobe. You see, what you're working with is the will. And I had a girlfriend and she had a little boy who was a challenge. He challenged every single thing. Whenever I'd visit, we could hardly talk. She'd end up putting him in the bedroom because he just acted out and she was beside herself. And then her and her husband went to some meetings where this educator was talking to them about choice. And so what they did is they changed the way that they handled this little boy, and very quickly they had amazing results. For instance, every time they'd go anywhere in the car, he would put on a turn when it was time to put the seatbelt on. You know, the father would be holding him and the mother would be putting on, he'd be arching his back, and terrible ordeal. So what they did then, they said to the little boy at the car, we're going to Grandma's house. And on the way, we're going to go over the bridge and we might see some ducks and etc., etc. I'm going to put my seatbelt on, so is Mother, and we're going to put your seatbelt on. And the child's looking. If you resist, Father will have to give you a sharp slap on the leg, and that will hurt. But if you sit there and let me put it on safely, there'll be no sharp slap, there'll be no pain, and you will enjoy your trip to Grandma's. What are you going to choose? Can you see that? The child's thinking very quickly. And if the child decides to act out, the father says, I'm so sorry. You've chosen the slap. Can you see that? And then the child knows very clearly. And why does the parent say, I'm so sorry? Because no parent wants to smack. Can you see that? It's like the two little children that I had with me for a day when all my children were there. Parents left them there for a day. They had to do something. It's a 5-year-old girl, 7-year-old boy. And they were so helpful. The little girl never said a thing. She was just beside her brother the whole time, and whatever the brother did, she did. And the little boy said, can I dry the dishes? I said, yeah. Can I help you get the clothes off the line? I said, yeah. And it's like this all day long. And after a few hours, I said, your parents must be so happy to have such good kids. And the little boy said, it took a lot of smacks to get us this good. Isn't that interesting? I would like to suggest that that parent never, ever administered discipline in anger. You see, it hurts a child far more to be yelled at, to be frowned at. It's far better to just nip it in the bud. Fingertip goes on, ooh. And then the parent doesn't get all frustrated. The child's not. Can you see that? It's so easy. In fact, easy parenting is using the will. The will should never be beaten to pieces, and it should never be let run wherever it goes. It should be gently guided and directed, just like you train a vine around a veranda pole. Now, I've got a vine I'm training around the veranda pole. Now, if I grab that vine and force it round, I'll break the little tendrils. But if I let it do whatever it wants, about 1 in 100 tendrils will get around the veranda pole. But if every day I go and pull it gently around, tuck it in. I come the next day, it's out again. I pull it round gently and I direct it again. And you know, eventually it's around there, isn't it? And I know as a parent, every day, gently guide and direct, guide and direct. You see, a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. And it's exactly the same when I'm helping people with physical or mental health. I always say, would you like me to help? And if they say, no, I'm fine, thanks, I say, fine. You see, I cannot help anyone unless they want to be helped. So you can see, it's a very important part of the brain. Dr. Neil Nedley, in his book, Depression: A Way Out, he calls it the crown of the brain. And as a psychiatric nurse, one of the wards I worked in were accident victim wards. Why have accident victims in a psych hospital? Because this part of the brain has been damaged and they have no ability really to order their lives anymore. One of the best things a parent can teach a child is self-control. And that's what discipline teaches a child, self-control. They want so much to go on that table, but it hurt. So can you see they control themselves? But what I want to talk about more is little by little things that are coming into the brain that are harming it. Notice that our skeletal system is an internal structure causing man to stand upright, but when it comes to the head, it becomes an external structure, protecting the most delicate and yet most important organ of the body. But there are 7 avenues of access into the brain: 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils and a mouth. Everything that's coming in through those avenues is affecting the brain. And in this first lecture, I want to look at foods and drinks. In my second lecture, I want to look at the things we've seen and heard through our lives. Sometimes potentially damaged things. And I want to show you how it affects the mind and how you can put it in a spot so that it need never harm you. Sugar. How could sugar be dangerous to the brain? You see, the brain cells consume 15 times the fuel of any other cell. But the brain can only hold a 2-minute supply. And this is where the problem arises. So a person has sugar in, and I'm mostly referring to the pure crystallized acid extracted from the sugar cane plant. Blood glucose levels rise dramatically. Does that mean reason, judgment and intellect are working really well? No, they're bypassed. It's like trying to control a fast car. And so very quickly the brain says to the pancreas, quick, insulin. But more insulin is released than should be released because there's so much glucose. Where are we going now? Where's reason, judgment and intellect down there? Lights are on but no one's home. This is when the children are bouncing off the wall. This is when they're scrapping and fighting and being disobedient. You want easy parenting, eliminate the sugar and use the will. Very easy. It's very easy. And you're at work and you say to your colleague who wants a coffee with sugar in it early in the morning, 9 o'clock, they've got their drop after their morning coffee that they had at 7 o'clock, now they've dropped at 9:30, and they say, I need a lift. Can you get me a cup of coffee or some lollies, or you call them candies there, Mars bar, Coke? And you say, oh, excuse me, but I've just been to some health lectures and I've just learnt that these things aren't good for you. What's the answer? Blip, blip, blip. I don't care about your health lectures. Just give me. Can you see that? It's not working. Reason, judgment and intellect aren't working. How long before they don't work? 2 minutes once it's dropped. And that's why the book by William Dufty is called Sugar Blues. Because what does sugar cause? The blues. It'll give that initial high, but then it'll give that corresponding drop. Now there's something else that is giving even a worse high and subsequently, in return, a worse drop. And it's the hybridized wheat. In the hybridization of the wheat, it produced a type of starch that gets the blood sugar level up higher than sugar. So blood sugar level for sugar goes this high. For wheat, it goes about that high. For sugar, it drops that low. For wheat, it'll drop that low. Now this hybridised wheat went worldwide in the 70s. So by the 1990s, it's basically in America, in Australia, in every pasta, every bread, every wheat product really. Diabetes has basically exploded. And diabetes is an inability to control that blood sugar level. And people with diabetes have double the risk of getting senile dementia or Alzheimer's, because the organs, which is the adrenal glands and the pancreas, which are designed to balance that blood sugar level, are basically exhausted with these products. But there's another stimulant, which is caffeine. You see, sugar and wheat cause a fuel imbalance, whereas caffeine causes a chemical imbalance. Let me show you. Here is the brain cell. And the brain cell is unique in that once it's deteriorated, it cannot regrow. And the brain cell, it doesn't touch another cell, it communicates with another cell via little chemical messengers. So at the end we've got little filaments, then the boutons, and here we have the next nerve cell, and here are the receiving station or the dendrites of the messages that are coming through. So the messages come through, they're encapsulated inside the cell, they're sent down the arm into the little bouton, and then they're released out and connect with the next nerve cell. Now that can be happening at 200 kilometres an hour. And one nerve cell has the ability to communicate with 20,000 other nerve cells. What an amazing brain we have. Still not fully understood. What does caffeine do? Well, caffeine disrupts those little chemical messengers. And the first one that's affected is adenosine. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that acts like a fuse box. And when caffeine goes in, adenosine levels drop. Why is that so? Well, you can buy a book, it's called Caffeine Blues, and he likens it to you're on safari, you turn the corner, you've been separated from your guide, and there's a lion on the path. What would happen in your body? Whew. Adenosine levels quickly drop because you want all stops out. You're about to do the run or the climb or the fight of your life. The other neurotransmitter that's affected is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine has to do with frontal lobe function, and it rises when you meet a tiger or a lion on the path. No wonder you're going to have to make some quick decisions. Do you think you can fight it? Do you think you can outrun it? Do you think you can climb that tree? The other neurotransmitter is dopamine. And dopamine is the pursuit of reward hormone, the pursuit of escape hormone, the pursuit of happiness hormone, and it rises. Blood pressure rises, ready to pump that blood through to the working muscles so you can do superhuman feats. Blood to the stomach stops because you want all the blood down to those working muscles. But there's no tiger on the path. And after half an hour, the body's going, they're not running, they're not jumping. Quick, develop extra receptor sites to grab every little bit of adenosine that comes through in an attempt to maintain the balance. Stop making so much acetylcholine. And eventually, after you've met a tiger on the path every day for 6 months, dopamine levels are exhausted. How would you feel if you met a tiger on the path every day after 6 months? How would you feel if you met three on the path a day after 6 months? There's a tiger on the path, so what? Gobble, 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 gobble. Depression's definition is a chemical imbalance in the brain. Nothing causes a chemical imbalance in the brain more than caffeine. And when people come to our health retreat, for the first 24 hours, we see a lot of suffering. Not from the ice addict, not from the alcoholic, not from the smoker, not from the heroin addict, and we've had them all, but from the coffee drinker. Isn't that incredible? Pardon?
Is that also true with other caffeine derivatives?
All caffeine.
Even when they say the natural guarana or...
Yeah. Well, it depends. You'd have to try it. But we had a lady do our program 4 green teas a day, and she couldn't even get out of bed by the end of Monday. Green tea? She said, I'm angry. She said, I only started drinking it because I was told that it's good for you. Contains antioxidants. I said, that's like Roundup. It's 99% water. Are we going to drink that? You see? How's mental illness in America nowadays? If you're anything like Australia, 50% of Australians are suffering from some form of mental illness. Wow. Scary stuff, isn't it? And you talk to school teachers, the amount of kids that come to school with the energy drinks, you know, the Red Bulls, Mother, V-drinks. And in Australia, I think I mentioned it the other night, 6 suicides, teenage adolescents a day. That's 42 a week. You won't read that in the newspaper. Scary stuff. I don't think this is the only contributing factor, but it certainly is a big contributing factor. How many Americans, how many Australians woke up to these 3 this morning? Most. Not you and me, of course. Mercury. Mercury is a neurotoxin. What's a neurotoxin? It's a brain poison. Did you know that for 300 years in America, mercury was banned in dentistry? And in the early 1920s, 3 European dentists came to America. They started their own association, the ADA, the American Dental Association, where they legalised mercury. Before that, it had always been the American Association of Dental Surgeons, where mercury was not used. Mercury is a neurotoxin. There is no safe dose of it. Did you know dentistry has the highest incidence of suicide? 50% of dentists today are still using it. It's fairly well known of its neurotoxicity. A lot of the old dentists love it because it's so hard, it stays there for a long time. What a worry. You see, one of the problems with mercury is it's bioaccumulative. That means the longer it is in the mouth, the more it is accumulating in the tissues. And the same with the fish. The larger the fish, the higher the concentration of mercury. We had a lady do our program recently and she'd had some neurological problems. She had a hair analysis test done and they found high levels of mercury. And she said, but I haven't got mercury fillings in my mouth and I've never had. But they discovered she was having tuna for lunch every day. We had a tuna fisherman do our program. He said, we catch 10-foot tunas. You've heard of Mad Hatter's disease? Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. Hatters used to go mad because they used to glue the felt together with mercury. And the dancing cat disease in Minamata Bay in Japan, cats were doing backflips. So they did some postmortems on them and found that they were damaged by the mercury. There was an aluminium factory on the bay in Minamata Bay and all the waste was going into the sea and the cats were eating the fish and they were getting this mercury poisoning. Interesting that they didn't call it mercury disease, they called it Mad Hatter disease. They didn't call it mercury disease, they called it dancing hat disease. You know, the tragedy is in that case in Japan, the government turned a blind eye to it and nothing happened. The tragedy is that the farmers that fished there, their children, many people were affected. I think it was discovered in the 80s and it was not till about, I think, 2005 that finally some green groups, some environmentally aware groups put pressure on the government and finally something was done about it. But point is, this stuff's toxic. Now, the two places most people get exposed is the fish and the fillings. So if you have mercury fillings in your mouth, my suggestion is find a biological dentist and remove them. Some people say, but I've had them in my mouth for 30 years and they've done me no harm. You do not know that. You see, when the mercury hits the bacteria in your gut, it converts it to methyl mercury, which is methylated mercury. It now can get through the blood-brain barrier. And when it gets through the blood-brain barrier, it starts eating holes in the myelin sheath. And that myelin sheath is vital for protection, nourishment, insulation, and conduction. Mercury is a neurotoxin, can kill brain cells. And once that brain cell's killed, it's gone. It cannot regenerate. I have 3 books in my library, all by Dr. Hal Huggins. The first book is called Uninformed Consent, because a dentist does not have to inform you of the neurotoxicity of mercury when he puts it in your mouth. The other book is It's All in Your Head, showing the link between what's happening in the teeth and what's happening in the body. And a friend said to Hal Huggins, what about the multiple sclerosis link? And Hal Huggins said, if I find 1,000 cases in my practice alone where multiple sclerosis can be directly linked with mercury, he said, I'll write a book. Well, I've got the book. It's called Solving the MS Mystery, and it's about an inch thick. This is toxic. There is no safe dose of it. In 1998, thimerosal, which is mercury, was banned in childhood vaccinations because of the link between mercury and autism. Did you hear that? You've probably read newspaper articles that say vaccines don't cause autism. Well, why did they ban thimerosal, which is mercury, in 1998? Why have some people got compensation from the pharmaceutical companies because of their autistic children? You can't believe everything you read, can you? Do you know the infuriating fact is they banned mercury in childhood vaccinations in 1998, but for 10 years children were still injected with vaccines with mercury in it because the pharmaceutical companies had a stockpile. Ooh. And I hear in America you can't even sue the pharmaceutical companies now. Is that right? There's a law passed to do that. Mm-hmm. That's why if someone rings me up and says, should I vaccinate? I said to them, you should not be swayed by my opinion or someone else's opinion. You need to investigate. Investigate. Have a good look at what's in the vaccines and say to your doctor, I will let you vaccinate my child if you sign this piece of paper ensuring me that my child will not have an adverse effect. In the 1970s, 1 in 10,000 children autistic. Today, 1 in 50.
Excuse me, Mom, can you rebuild that myelin sheath?
You can. You can. Alcohol is also a neurotoxin. These are the 2 neurotoxins. When someone's under the influence of alcohol, how's their reason, judgment, and intellect? Gone. And that's why most car accidents happen. In Australia, you can start alcohol at 18 years of age. And in Australia, there was a documentary recently where they interviewed paramedics, where they interviewed police, and they said almost a half of every trouble they're called to on a Friday and Saturday night is alcohol related. They said that is more than all the illegal drugs combined. And this is the legal drug. There is no safe dose of this stuff. It kills brain cells. And your American history shows the prohibition. 1920 to 1933, alcohol was illegal. Did you know that in that time, mental institution occupancy dropped to 8%? Did you know that the jails were nearly empty? Did you know that domestic violence was nearly wiped out? And it's very hard to get those statistics. Drugs. Drugs never cure disease, they just change the form and location of the disease. Yes?
Do you know where you could get those statistics?
Well, I got those statistics off an 85-year-old man who'd been a key member in the Temperance Society in about the 40s. And he said they had a vast library on all of this. So that's a long time ago. So I cannot help you with that one. I saw a documentary on the prohibition, about a year ago now, and none of what I have just talked about was mentioned. In fact, they said when they finally could have the alcohol again, it brought so much joy to so many people. And they claimed on the documentary that they only legalised it because of the moonshine, black market, mafia. But my friend said to me, no. He said, the fact is, the American government said to the American people, if we legalise alcohol, the American people will not have to pay taxes. Do you pay taxes? So that, of course, was initially. Now, with drugs, I'm not only talking about the recreational drugs, I'm not only talking about the mind-altering drugs, I'm talking about the many drugs that have as their side effect depression. My father passed out at the age of 80. He was rushed to hospital. My sister's a doctor of archaeology. I have another doctor who's a scientist, and so they rushed him to the best hospital, to the best doctors. And they gave him a strong course of antibiotics, which gave him kidney failure. Then they had to catheterise him. And then that gave him heart arrhythmia. And it just went, and then the drug that they gave him for heart arrhythmia gave him depression. It was unbelievable. I just watched what was happening to my father. I'm just so glad that this doctor that came in one day, she must have been about 80. She looked at my father, she said, "Show me his tongue." Doesn't happen often. And she said, and she wrote, "And take him off this, and take him off this, and take him off that." She took him off most of his medication, and finally I was able to get him up to my rainforest. My sisters weren't happy. They had a meeting with me. They said, "You'll take him off his medication." I said, "No, I will not. I never touch anyone's medication." So they let me have him because they were all too busy anyway. I never said anything to my father. I gave him nourishing food. I gave him lots of water. He started to walk a little bit more every day. And on the second week, he called me. He said, "Barbara." I came in. He said, "Look at this." And he had his foot on the bin. You call it a trash can, yeah? We don't call it trash. We call it rubbish. And he let go of this bag full of his drugs, and it went into the bin. And I said, "Hooray!" And he went from strength to strength to strength. Do you know, when I analysed why he passed out, he was travelling because my father's an inventor, and he was going to a convention of inventors. And he had had no water. He was in a hot car, and when he got there, they gave him a cup of coffee. And he passed out. And yet, when I went into a conference of all the doctors who were trying to analyse what was wrong, one said he had Legionnaire's disease, one said he had amoebic dysentery, and I thought, give me a break. But I had to behave myself, or my sisters wouldn't let me have him. So I just sat there and smiled. Anyway, one day Dad said to me, "I'd like to take the car to town." It was a 2-hour trip to town. I said, "Fine, Dad." My sisters nearly flipped when I told them. But he had all his faculties there. They wanted to take his car away from him. After 6 weeks, he said, "I think I'll go home now." And my sister picked him up and she said, "Do you want any medication?" He said, "No." "Did Barbara take you off your medication?" He said, "Barbara didn't say a word." You see, often it gets just so complicated. A friend of mine had a bypass operation and the anaesthetic gave him depression. He said for 1 year he conquered that depression. So not only have we got our mind-altering drugs, but we've got many drugs that have as their side effect depression. I'm shocked at how many families I meet who know someone in their inner or slightly outer circle whose mind has been damaged by the recreational drugs. Yeah? My husband is one of 5 children. His youngest brother was dux of the school, actually second youngest. My husband was the school's misfit. He was wild. In fact, he eventually was expelled, so was the other brother. I said to him, how did you feel about this brother who was top of the debating team and was dux of the school? He said, oh, we were proud of him. He said, and if anyone looked sideways at him, he said, we just beat him up. My husband became a Christian at the age of 22 and he turned his life around. So that's Michael's brother. At the age of 16, he had some marijuana and his mind was tipped. Within 6 months, he was failing all his exams. He was expelled from school. And then he went over to Western Australia. You know, in Australia, there's the other side of Australia. And no one heard of him for 20 years. Then he came back and he was a little bit weird. He still is a little bit weird. So sad. This brilliant young mind, scales were tipped by the drugs. I've got a friend who's a physician. She said, do you know in the medical journals it says that antidepressants cause depression? Now, if someone's about to slit their wrists, an antidepressant may calm them down and save their life. Granted. But then the question mark should be asked, why did they get to that? What can we do to turn things around? And in my next lecture, I'll list the causes, some of the causes of depression, because there are over 100 causes of depression. Tobacco. How does tobacco affect the mind? Well, here are the carotid arteries, and these are supply lines to headquarters. You know, in the war, it was considered a victory if supply lines to headquarters was bombed, because if headquarters is bombed, hey, do you know that's what tobacco does? It bombs the supply lines. These are the two carotid arteries coming up here. They're the supply lines of nutrients, of oxygen, of water to headquarters. What tobacco does is it weakens the arterial wall. And because the arterial wall is weakened, the repairer and the rebuilder is sent to plug up the hole. Its name is LDL, cholesterol, low density lipoprotein. That's its job, to plug up the holes. And because the cigarettes keep coming and maybe a bit of alcohol and a bit of sugar, the damage is coming. Maybe they're breathing in mould from a mouldy carpet. That can damage the walls. Can you see what's happening here? What's happening to the artery? It's narrowing. It's called atherosclerosis. When I worked in the operating theatre, we did a bypass one day and the surgeon pulled out this white gristly stuff from the artery we'd just cut out. And what do we all see it as? Cholesterol. Now, to blame cholesterol for arteriosclerosis is like blaming the fire trucks because they're always at the fire. They must cause the fire. They're always there. It's like blaming the ambulance for every accident. Well, they must have caused it. They're always there. Can you see that? What tobacco also does is it causes thickening of the artery, but also it causes the blood cells to clump together. They should be nice and free like this, bumping around. Can you see that when people smoke, they inhibit nutrient, oxygen, water supply to the brain? Smokers will never attain to mental brilliance because of this. We hear much about the effect of tobacco on the lungs. Granted, it's a toxic poison there, but you don't hear much about its effect on the functioning of the brain. MSG, monosodium glutamate. Monosodium glutamate causes the nerve cells on the tongue to overfire, and when they overfire, the food tastes fantastic. Do you know what that means? Rotten food would taste good. A lump of mud would taste good. Scary, isn't it? But if the nerve cells on the tongue overfire, nerve cells everywhere overfire. And I'm speaking about the brain. So when people are having food that has MSG in it to make it taste good, they can have brain cell death after that meal. When you eat organically grown fruits and vegetables, when they're prepared in the best way, when their flavour is enhanced with a good quality olive oil, with unrefined salt and fresh herbs, there is no need ever to go to this. But food today is so tasteless because the soil is impoverished, the plant's impoverished, and when human being eats that plant, what do we get? Impoverished. But there's no taste. You see, minerals give the flavour to food. Be careful of MSG. It's under different names now. Natural flavour enhancer. Almost sounds healthy, doesn't it? Hydrolyzed vegetable protein, hydrogenated vegetable protein. These are some of the names given to MSG. And be careful of your meat alternatives. A lot of those are laced with these things. In fact, I'd venture to say it's almost safer to eat meat than some of those meat alternatives. I eat legumes for my protein. Chemicals. We've got to get the chemicals out of our lives, out of our kitchens, out of our laundries, out of our food, out of our toothpaste, out of our shampoo. Become a label reader. One lady said, it's going to take me forever to shop. I said, only the first time. Because you get to know. In fact, when I go into the supermarket, I know exactly where to go. There are a whole lot of aisles I don't even go down. You've got to know what's going into your body. We're dealing with enough without putting more into them. They can cause a deterioration of the nerve cells. Mould. Mould can eat out cells. I had a chemist do my program. She was about 65. She said, 3 years ago, my husband died. She said, mould ate out his lungs. She said, as he was going through the sickness, he kept being given more antibiotics and more antibiotics. And of course, what are antibiotics made from? A mould waste. So it was literally feeding them. She said they did biopsy after biopsy, and finally they did a test, and it showed that he had fungus in his lungs. But she said by that stage it was too late, and she said he died. When she came to our health retreat, I have an extensive library by different doctors, professors, scientists showing the mould link with disease. I've got a textbook, which is a medical textbook. It cost me $500. It's called Clinical Mycology, because the study of mycology is the study of fungus. She couldn't keep her eyes out of the book. She said, this is the information I've been wanting. She said, I'm in a court case at the moment. She said, not because of revenge. My husband is dead now, but she said, I want it acknowledged so that no other person will go through that. It can eat out lungs. It can eat out brain cells. So that's enough incentive to check your house and make sure what you're breathing when you're in your bedrooms, your bathroom, is pure air. I have had 2 guests in the last 6 months who suffered from depression from being in a mouldy house. And there are 2 very interesting cases. No trace of depression, you know, go-getters, working well. In one case it was a man, in another case it was a woman. And they moved into a mouldy house. It was cheap rent, you know. And one of the worst cases is when you clean it. If you put bleach on mould, you create one of the most toxic mixes there is. My daughter told me from Wisconsin there was a newspaper article about a year ago of a lady who died from cleaning mould with bleach. They came into her bathroom and she was dead. The problem was it was quite extensive. She'd really laced it with the bleach, and every window was shut and every door was shut. Now most people clean bleach or clean mould with bleach, but they've usually just a little bit, and usually the windows are open. And they do suffer a little bit, often they don't realise why. But if you put vinegar on mould, it will kill it and it won't kill you. Yes? Mildew is the same thing. That's right. It's the same thing. It is toxic. See, if you have mould somewhere, the best thing is to get a spray bottle of pure white vinegar. And you go in with your mask on and you spray it and you leave the room quickly. Come back 10 minutes later, it'll be dead, and then you can wipe it off. But if you spray and wipe, the spores and the mould dust can come into the air, go into your skin, you can breathe it in. And then, when you've wiped it all away, then get a cloth and put some oregano essential oil and wipe it. But at the same time, ring the plumber to find out why it's there. Sometimes it's obvious, you know, it's a bathroom without a window and no fan in it. You're going to get mould in there. That's why you have to have fans in, you have to have exhaust, you have to wipe that moisture away. It's a very socially acceptable list, isn't it? There's no need for me to talk to you about the danger of arsenic, cyanide, heroin, methadone, ecstasy, ice, but there is a great need for people to be aware of the dangers of these. It's a very socially acceptable list. But little by little, like the dripping tap on a stone, these things are eating away at mental function, causing degeneration. In my next lecture, after the break, I'm going to show you how there is a way to stimulate neurogenesis. What's that? That's new brain cells. It's only been known since 1998. I had a lady do our program. She was in her mid-40s and she had 4 children. Her eldest son was 17 and he had irritable bowel syndrome and he'd been on strong cortisone anti-inflammatory medications since he was 7. They were starting to cut part of his colon out. Her 15-year-old daughter was obese. Her 10-year-old daughter had one leg removed from cancer. What's happening in this home? And they ate nothing but takeaways. They ate no fruits and vegetables at all. Every night it was, which fast food will we have tonight? She came and did our program. She started to learn about the importance of eating nourishing food, the importance of drinking water, the importance of stopping the stimulants. And I had to say to her, God winks at our ignorance. It's Acts 17 verse 30. I said, so should we. Don't beat yourself up over this one. You didn't know. If you didn't know, you can't be held accountable. But sorry guys, after hearing all this, you're accountable. So she went home and she started little by little to implement things. She emailed me 10 weeks later. She said, Barbara, something's returned I never thought I'd have. She said, I now have willpower. Isn't that interesting? I now have willpower. All of these things of themselves and absolutely in culmination with each other compromise willpower. If someone says to me, I have no willpower, I say, why not? What are you doing? That is compromising it. This lady said to me, I'm so excited, I've lost 20 pounds. I'm nearing the end of the stay in America and I'm finally getting the pound kilo thing right, because we have kilos. She said, I can be in the bar with my girlfriends, girls' night out, they're having champagne in champagne glasses. I've got sparkling mineral water in my champagne glass. She said, I'm enjoying myself, but she said, I know that tomorrow morning my children will have a happy mother. Can you see what the frontal lobe does? Foresight. Do you think her girlfriends are thinking about that? It is the furthest thing from their mind. Tomorrow morning. But hey, tomorrow morning comes, doesn't it? She said, it's amazing. I have no temptation to even have a sip of theirs. But by the way, if she did have a sip, that could be enough to just compromise her willpower so she starts to have a little bit more. I had a girlfriend who was a big coffee drinker, liked her alcohol every night. Her kids in the morning, they used to get out of bed, have breakfast, get it by themselves really quickly and try and get out of the door before she woke up. Because when she woke up, she used to scream at them because she woke up feeling terrible from all these things that she had. I had another girlfriend that used to eat a block of chocolate every Saturday night at a movie, and her kids knew Sunday morning, get out of the house. Road rage. I have a theory for road rage. It's right here. compromising the frontal lobe. You see that? I'm going to give everyone a break now. It is 7:05. Please come back in 5 minutes. When you come back, we're going to look at the mental laws that govern the brain, and we're going to have a look at the emotional and the mental aspect of brain function. Welcome back to the second part of the lecture. We're going to be looking at the emotional and the mental aspect of disease. And to have a look at this, I'm going to use the framework of the laws that govern the mind. The first law that governs the functioning of the mind is the law of cause and effect, which basically is Newton's third law of motion. To every action, there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Never should the effect be blamed as the cause, and how often is it? I've had people come to me and say, I found the cause of all my problems. I've got chronic fatigue syndrome. That's not the cause of all your problems. That's the result. Chronic fatigue syndrome is just a name given to a group of symptoms that the person's always tired. That's the result. And I've also had some people say, I found the cause of all my problems. I've got depression. You can't just get depression. There is always a cause. Proverbs 26 verse 2 states that the curse causeless shall not come. In other words, no problem happens without a cause. There is always a reason. And that's why the detective hat has to be put on. And remember that that professor that I quoted to the other night, why are these things so? So what I'm going to have a look at is I'm going to have a look at a few sadly common mental problems we're seeing. One is panic attacks. And I'll give you an illustration of a panic attack. I had a lady come into our program and she said, I get panic attacks. Now that always challenges me because you can't just get a panic attack. So I put my detective hat on. When did you get your first panic attack? Oh, it was 2 years ago now. A man at work was diddling the books or playing with the figures. She said, I blew the whistle on him and that night I got a brick through my front window. Do you know there's a time to panic, isn't there? Now that night, that experience had a profound effect on her. It made a strong pathway. You know, when we say something had a profound effect on us, we never forget it. It made a strong pathway. So what happened after that was every time she'd go through a stressful situation, guess where her emotions would go? Down that strong pathway. And the more she went down that pathway, what was happening to it? Do you know, science shows us that these are physical pathways in our brain. She went to the doctor. She was getting very concerned. The doctor said, I think I've found the cause of all your problems. You get panic attacks. What did that do to the pathway? That put a bit of Rio in it. And he also said something else. You'll be on panic attack medication for the rest of your life. Her mother said, what did the doctor say? He said, I get panic attacks. Can you see that? He said, I'll be on medication for the rest of my life. She came to our health retreat 18 months later. She wanted help. When she told me her story, I said, I think you're panicking about your panic attacks. She smiled. What did the smile say? I think you're right. It sounds terrible to say this, but she'd actually got into the habit of panicking. I said to her, I believe you will be able to overcome these panic attacks. What did I do when I said that? I made another pathway. I said, I believe that eventually you'll be able to get off your medication. I made another pathway. But I knew that the first time a stressful situation arose, where would her emotions want to go? Which is still the strongest pathway? Down this one. So I gave her a whole lot of things that she could do when she feels it coming. I said, the first thing you've got to do is laugh. She said, I will not feel like laughing. I said, you're absolutely right. You will not feel like laughing, but I said, you'll be able to laugh. What did I do when I said you'll be able to laugh? I made a you'll be able to laugh pathway. You see that? I said, just go like this. Ha, 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 ha. And while you're going ha, 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 get a crystal of Celtic salt, put it on your tongue, drink a glass of water. It helps to get the water into the cells. Our brain's a hydroelectric system. I said, go to the kitchen and get a chamomile tea bag, get a cup down, pour your tea. Chamomile is a mild tranquilizer. Take it outside. What will her emotions be doing? They'll be screaming at her, but just ignore them. Just ignore them. She went outside. Breathe deeply. Oxygen soothes the nerves. Maybe do some stretches. Sit down, have the chamomile tea. It takes about 15 minutes and then it's all diffused. You see that? It's all diffused. How did that lady feel after she conquered her first panic attack? Like a mighty conqueror. What's she conquering? She's actually conquering the back part of her brain, which is her feelings. And the feelings are a bad boss because your feelings go up and down like the wind. Feelings aren't bad, but they're not a good guide. But the frontal lobe is a good boss because every decision it makes is made according to reason, judgment, and intellect. Now, before she came and learnt these things, she was having panic attacks because that's where her feelings were leading her. Now she understood about the frontal lobe and the back part of the brain. She took control of her feelings by her frontal lobe. She learnt about the importance of keeping these things out of the body because they compromise frontal lobe function. She learnt about the importance of being well hydrated, exercise, early to bed, nourishment. You see that? You see, your feelings are like a wild horse and they're going to go all over the place. Your feelings need the bridle on them. They need the reins. That's your frontal lobe. And there are a couple of Psalms that talk about it. Psalm 39 verse 1 says, I will take heed to my ways that I earn not with my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle. There's your bridle. The other psalm is Psalm 16 verse 7 where it says, I will bless the Lord who hath given me counsel. My reins also instruct me in the night season. They're the reins. That's the bridle. Let's say I said to a man, can you take this wild horse for a ride? Comes back at the end of the day. I said, where have you been? He said, oh, the horse wanted to go all over the place. Are you going to let it? That's what your bridle's for. Whoa up, whoa up, whoa up. And that's what this girl did. She went whoa up with her feelings. Whoa up, settle down. Have you ever said that to yourself? Settle down. You'll be right. Settle down. How long will it take before the new pathway, the conquering the panic attack pathway, is bigger than the old pathway? Science shows us now 21 visits. If you visit it once a day, that's 21 days. And after not going down this pathway for 21 days, what's happening to it? It's shrinking. And so the day comes when a stressful situation arises, and where does that girl's feelings go? Down the new pathway. Can you see that? Can you see how the physical things are helping the function of the brain? I've seen many conquer their panic attacks by doing that. What pathways are we each feeding? I was staying with a lady last week, the week before last, and her little granddaughter was there, and her little granddaughter got overtired. And she was just crying and crying and for an hour. I said to the lady there next door, I said, it's important to conquer this one. This child's 6. I said, can you imagine that at 15? I said, this child's got into the habit of reacting like that. She said, well, what will I do? I said, there's a few things you can do. When she's like that, hold her wrists and say, settle down, sweetheart, settle down. And if the child tries to pull away, it will hurt the child's hands. If the child tries to pull away, go a little firmer. Ah, sorry, sweetheart. And if the child stops pulling away, it doesn't hurt so much. But just keep them calm, keep them still. Another thing that you can do is you can sit, put the child's back on yours, fold their arms and hold their wrists there. And just hold them. Very firmly, but just hold them and keep saying, you're all right, calm down. Calm down, sweetheart. You're all right. No, don't yell, calm down. And if the child tries to break away from you, just hold them firmly. It will hurt them. Can you see, resisting will hurt, but compliance won't hurt. It's actually like the bit in the horse's mouth, isn't it? And eventually the child will settle down. Or the other thing you can do, and I've seen my daughter do this, she's got one little girl that can tend to that. She takes her outside and puts the cold hose over her head. It's all right, sweetheart, just cooling you down. You know, it was interesting, the next day, when she started to get a bit upset, the mother said, do I need to cool you down, darling? Can you see when you teach the child this, what are you teaching them? It's to strengthen their frontal lobe. It's as simple as that. Many get into these habit pathways that can be quite easily redirected. Now, the girl that conquered her panic attack, she rewired her brain. And you can be rewiring your brain till the day you died. And the little baby I told you about, baby Sonny, who kept poking me, I rewired his brain. Science now shows us that we can be rewiring our brain till the day we die. You know the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Wrong. You can. Isn't that good news? What's the saying? If there's a will, where there's a will, there's a way. If you say you can, you will. If you say you can't, you're right. You won't. What about depression? Depression is not a cause, depression is an effect. The chemical imbalance, which is the medical definition of depression, just doesn't happen for no reason. So chemical imbalance, what causes the chemical imbalance? Let me make a list of all the things that can cause a chemical imbalance in the brain. Chemical imbalance in the brain can be caused by too many highs. Sugar causes a high, wheat causes a high, caffeine causes a high, alcohol causes a high, drugs cause a high, tobacco, MSG. These all cause transitory highs. What's a transitory high? Brief, doesn't stay there. It's a stimulating high. And they all come with corresponding lows. What's the old saying? The higher you go, the harder or the lower you fall. They all come with corresponding lows. That's why the book's called Sugar Blues. There's a book called Grain Brain showing all the damaging effects of wheat on the brain. There's another book called Caffeine Blues, because that's what caffeine causes, the blues. The hangover after a night of alcohol. That's the body saying, please don't do this to me anymore. The desperate fight to get another hit of the drug. Desperately reaching for their next cigarette. The damage done by MSG, they all cause lows. So all of those by themselves and absolutely in culmination can contribute to depression. Chemical imbalance in the brain can be caused by a lack, can be caused by a lack of oxygen. Oxygen vitalizes, invigorates and electrifies the brain. Do you remember last night I drew that CBD inside the cell and I showed you that oxygen will give you 18 times more energy than a cell without oxygen? That can happen in your 1 trillion brain cells. Lack of oxygen can be caused by lack of exercise. No wonder Dr. Neil Nedley, he advises very depressed people to go on 7 hours of exercise a day. Well, that's not 7 hours of interval training. He says after 1 week, 7 days, they're so improved they can go to a 1 hour a day maintenance dose or interval training 15 minutes a day maintenance dose. That's impressive, isn't it? Lack of sunshine can cause depression. The ultraviolet rays from the sun go through neurochemical pathways, hit the pineal gland and cause a release of serotonin. That's why you feel good on a sunny day. The other thing that will cause a release of serotonin is sleeping in the hours between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. So sleep in those hours of power and sunshine both cause a release of serotonin. So one of the contributing factors to mental illness we're seeing today is the amount of people who are on technology till midnight. And that's from the 7-year-old to the 80-year-old. Did you know that?
What was that again?
Exposure to technology on the screens, on the computers, on the Game Boys till midnight. Rest. Rest is different to sleep. Rest is doing something different to what you normally do. If you're a computer programmer, your rest might be climbing mountains. One of the best way to rest the mental part of your brain is to go and do some swimming or climbing a mountain. That's the best way, activating another part of your brain to rest the part of your brain that you are using in a certain activity. We've got many monomaniacs today. Have you heard of a monomaniac? A monomaniac just develops one part of the brain. We've got so many girls today that they're really good on Facebook, they're really good on the games, but they don't know how to cook, they don't know how to sew, they don't know how to clean house, they don't know how to mother. I've seen them. The baby's crying and they're in their arms and she's on Facebook. She's on the... There are many men today, young men, who don't know how to change a washer in a tap, they don't know how to chop wood, they don't know how to change a tyre, they don't know any of those basics. And yet they're really good on a computer. I made sure that when my children left home, and some of them left home to go and get their apprenticeships at the age of 15, and I guess they left home a little earlier because they finished their school early because they were homeschooled. I made sure they could all cook, they could all clean, all the boys could sew a button on a shirt and sew up a hole in a sock. You know, it's one of the best things and very important thing for parents to teach their children independence, to be able to look after themselves. Now, I remember my son, Peter, when his mates came over, he was about 16 and they were going to go somewhere. Well, he had them all cleaning his bathroom and doing his dishes. He said, we've got to get it. We can't go until my house is all clean. Rest is doing something different to what you normally do. And when I was 25, I read the Bible. And when I got to Exodus, where Moses was given the 10 Commandments, I read to the 4th commandment, and it said, 6 days God made heaven and earth. 7th day he rested. Man should do all his work in 6 days and rest on the 7th. And I thought, how does a housewife do that? Now I'm pregnant or breastfeeding non-stop for 14 years. I've got babies and toddlers. And twice I had babies 18 months apart. And that's, you call it diapers. There's no disposable nappies then. I remember pegging 49 nappies or diapers on the line one day. How can I have a rest? But then I thought, you know, if I've got visitors, I've got everything ready. So I just made plans that there was one day where I didn't cook, I didn't clean, and I spent time with the kids. We do bushwalking as Christians. We always read the Bible in the morning. It revolutionised my life because with a mother, I'm up in a rainforest, no electricity, I'm working hard. It's almost an endless round. It just changed my life. There was one day where I just stopped all that and did different things. Now, to this day, Michael and I, we love work. You can't hold us down. But there is one day where we'll stop. And we're not lying around doing nothing all day. We might visit friends, maybe go to church in the morning, might even lie down and read a book. I'll never do that on another day. It's just like a stopper system that God gave us to prevent overwork. Lack of water can cause depression because our brain's a hydroelectric system. No hydro, No electricity. Negative thought patterns can develop in a dehydrated brain. Lack of fat. It's the fattiest organ in the body. Your brain loves fat. Is it this fat-free phobia that's overtaken the planet, responsible for, well, partly responsible for the mental illness we're seeing? Do you know some of the authorities are saying today that fat phobia is so entrenched in so many minds, it might not be until the next generation that they'll start to consider the importance of fat. But there is a wave of awakening happening. There are two fats that the brain loves. One is coconut. You see, the medium-chain fatty acids in coconut are converted in the liver to ketones, and ketones are neurohealers. Neurohealers, and they're neuroprotective. If you want to pursue this a little bit more, you can read about it in Dr. Bruce Fife's book, that's F-I-F-E. He's got two books, one's called Stop Autism Now and one's called Stop Alzheimer's Now. I believe every home should have the book Stop Alzheimer's Now. Every home that has that book means there's another home where the people won't get Alzheimer's, as long as they do what the, what the book indicates. And the other fat that the brain loves is omega-3. Now, omega-3 is found in flaxseed, it's found in chia seed, and it's found in walnuts. There is research that shows breastfed babies are smarter because breast milk contains the omega-3s. Deteriorates very easily, so the powdered milk really doesn't have it in it. Another lack is lack of progesterone. Last night I talked about the hormonal imbalance that we are seeing, and the hormone balance is increase in estrogen that has displaced progesterone. And progesterone is the happy hormone. Many are low in progesterone, and I went through that last night. So I've seen many people, particularly women, boost their progesterone by going onto the Anna's Wild Yam Cream, changing the lifestyle, and then little by little they're able to ease off their antidepressants. Lack of minerals. There are two minerals that work together in getting the messages down that arm, and one is calcium and one is magnesium. It works like this. Calcium constricts, magnesium relaxes. Calcium constricts, magnesium relaxes. And so when the messages are going down the arm, they're basically going like this. Faster than that, of course. So lack of calcium and or lack of magnesium can inhibit the messages coming from cell to cell. Now, previously, I have explained to you the damaging effects of caffeine on the neurotransmitters in the brain. But caffeine also is the biggest culprit for leaching calcium and magnesium out of the body. So caffeine, it's like it has a double whammy effect on damaging the brain function. Lack of vitamins can cause depression. The vitamins that are the most famous are the B vitamins. Think of B vitamins as brain vitamins. But the most famous is vitamin B3. 1% of psychiatrists today are treating mental illness with nutrition. I have about 5 books at home by different doctors who are treating mental illness with nutrition. And the B3 is what they're using in very high amounts for schizophrenia, bipolar. One doctor's using 10,000 milligrams of nicotinic acid. That's 10 grams of nicotinic acid. That's not forever, that's just initially. Excess. We're looking at what causes the chemical imbalance. Excess food. Excess food can cause depression because the stomach gets so irritated. The nerves get irritated, the whole system gets irritated. Our stomachs need a rest between meals. So it's not only eating all day that can irritate the nerves, but it's also eating too much at a meal. Excess pain can cause depression. Pain is debilitating. If a person is experiencing excess pain, the detective hat has to be put on to find out why are these things so and what can be done to bring relief. And there are many water treatments, herb poultice treatments that can do a great job at reducing pain. Excess stimulation, this is big today. And the excess stimulation that I'm referring to is the screens, whether it be iPad, Game Boys, your games, computers, television, but also the heavy rock music, where the brain is overstimulated. And when all of that's taken away, the brain can get very depressed. The brain can be poisoned. What poisons the brain? And this is the neurodegeneration. And in his book, Stop Alzheimer's Now, Dr. Bruce Fife, he talks a fair bit about this. Heavy metals can cause damage in the brain. Drugs damage the brain. MSG damages the brain. Chemicals damage the brain and poison the brain. Mold poisons the brain. Something else poisons the brain. And this may surprise you, but it may not surprise you, and that is negativity. Do you know what this means? You can have someone doing everything right, and that they're entertaining or cherishing negativity. And that's one of the aspects of especially the damaging things a lot of young people are seeing, the very violent movies, games, it's producing this negativity in the brain. Now, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, in her book, Who Switched Off My Brain, she shows that when we entertain or cherish negativity, it damages the nerves. She explains it like this. When a negative thought comes into our brain, it's like a breeze. And the breeze wafts through the branches of the trees. These are like branches of a tree. And at that point, we have a choice. Will we keep that negative thought or will we let it go straight on out? If we cherish or entertain negativity, what's entertain mean? Come in, stay the night, actually stay the week. Are we doing that to negativity? When we do, it takes root and thorns develop in between the dendrites, and those thorns have the ability to damage the tissues, all from negativity. Dr. Neil Nedley stated that genetics cannot cause depression. Isn't that good news? He also stated that lifestyle tragedy cannot cause depression. Isn't that good news? Because every heart has its sorrow. Every heart has suffered in some way. But, he says, on top of one or two of those, you throw this into the equation. You put this into the equation. You put that into the equation. And you know what happens? The scales are tipped. The good news is we have no say over genetics, and we have no say over lifestyle tragedy, but we have total say over this. Never would I want anyone to think that I'm implying it is their fault they have depression. No, no way. Many people are sick, mentally and physically, through ignorance. Most people are unaware of the dangers of this. Most people are unaware of the dangers of lack of this. There are many missing links that are never addressed, and when I worked as a psychiatric nurse, none of this was addressed. Never addressed. They're all drinking coffee. They're all having lollies and sugar. How come? Well, guess what? Guess who else is having it? The nurses. Well, why don't they have mental illness? You'd be very surprised. That's right, in the AA meeting, the caffeine's there. I used to work as a psychiatric nurse. They stop the alcohol, they stop the heroin, then they go to the cigarettes and they go to the 20 cups of coffee a day. No one ever looks at it. And I know as a nurse, they give you presents. What are the presents? Big boxes of chocolates. And many nurses are overweight. We had a young man do our program. He just walked across Australia from the most western to the most eastern point. He was walking, campaigning against teenage suicide. He was 33. He walked for 14 hours a day. Took him 5.5 months. When he'd finished on the Friday, his mother shouted him a week at Misty Mountain Health Retreat on the Sunday. When he heard this lecture, he came up to me and he said, "I'm shocked." He said, "I have never told anyone this," but he said, "I was at boarding school from the age of 13. He said, "At the age of 15, I put a gun in my mouth." He said, "To this day, I don't know why I didn't pull the trigger." He said, and then I realised why he was campaigning against teenage suicide. He said, "I was having 15 cups of coffee a day." I said, 15 cups of coffee a day, don't they check? He said, "No." It's like in AA, don't they check? No. He said, "For the first time in my life," and here we are 18 years later, "for the first time in my life, I am free from guilt. I no longer hold guilt." Who holds the guilt? These two here. Most people aren't aware of the danger. They blame the genetics or the germ or the... Many are sick through ignorance. When someone comes to me wanting help with depression, do you know what the first thing I do is? I get them to drink more water. I get them to start having their main meal at breakfast and lunch and eat lightly at night. I get them to go to bed early. I get them to address the bedroom, that there's no technology in the bedroom, no mould, windows are open. I'm shocked when I drive through your town, there's no houses with open windows. All the windows are shut, but you have beautiful cool nights. Forget the air conditioner, open the window. Fresh air, it's the first law of health. That's what I start on. Don't touch anything else. Just get all that in order. Then the brain thinks a little clearer and we can start to discuss why these things are so. Dr. Neil Nedley decided to start implementing some lifestyle changes in his patients. He's a GP, in his patients that had depression. He said, if I could equal what medication does, he said, I'll be happy. He said, far exceeded. Huh? Far exceeded what medication did. Isn't that good news? Yes? Okay, so I put them with the chemicals. And people say, what's safer, sugar or the chemical sweeteners? I say, how do you want to die? They're both just as dangerous as each other. And there is no need to go there because you've got things like honey. You Americans have maple syrup. We can hardly afford that. And you've also got stevia, which is a little plant stevia, plant sweetener. There are so many things, options today. The Bible says, do unto others as you would have them do to you. That is a nice saying, but it's more than a nice saying. That's divine law. And that law states that whatever you give out, you shall receive again. That's good news and bad news. When is it bad news? When what you're giving out is not good. When someone's been very badly abused, very badly treated. I've met people who've been sexually abused for 30 years. One girl right up to the age of 30. Wow. Physically and sexually abused. Wow. How do you walk away from that? There's only one way you can walk away from it. And that comes to the second law, which is the law of choice. And the choice that allows you to walk away from painful past is forgiveness. You see, forgiveness cuts the chains that bind you to painful past. Forgiveness is the only prescription in the entire universe that has the power to break the chemical bonds of hostility, anger, and hate. There is no other way. Forgiveness gives you wings. Forgiveness gives you freedom. Forgiveness sets the prisoner free. The prisoner is me. One lady said, but they don't deserve to be forgiven. I said, absolutely right, but it's got nothing to do with it. It's the best selfish decision that you can make. It's like a 14-year-old girl I was working with. She'd been sexually abused by her father. She's angry, she's bitter. No wonder. So I sat with her one day for 2 hours, explaining to her the power of forgiveness. Let it go. It'll free you. Finally, after 2 hours, she said, all right, I forgive. No feeling there. How could there be? How could there be feeling? You see, forgiveness is a frontal lobe decision, not a feeling one. Your feelings are going to trick you. They're going to tell you, don't do it. He doesn't deserve to. No, don't go there. I'm going to give you a scientific fact that you might think sounds a little flippant. Fake it till you make it. Got that? Who are you faking? The wild horse. Don't refer to him. Just do it. And when this girl said, all right, I forgive, what was the pathway like? I jumped up, shook her hand and said, congratulations. You've just made the best decision of your life. Slight smile. What did I do when I said that? I strengthened the pathway. Every time she goes there, what's she doing to that pathway? Can you see that? Her sister wrote to the father and said that had done the abuse. This is what she wrote in her letter, because she was able to forgive a lot easier. She said, I love you, I forgive you, and I never want to see you again. That's powerful. That's very powerful, and it cuts the painful past away. Forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice. Fake it till you make it, because practice makes perfect and practice makes permanent. You may not feel like it today or tomorrow or the next day, but in about a week, the feelings might start to come around. You see, your words affect your feelings. So don't go there. You can control your feelings by your words. Don't wait till you feel like it. Just do it. You'll bring that wild horse under control. He'll get the message. I've seen many freed from mental, emotional and physical sicknesses, disease, through forgiveness. It's a very powerful thing. Just do it. Just do it. Don't wait till you feel like it. Just do it. Because your words affect your feelings. Love is also a choice. Love is not dependent on feelings. Hollywood is wrong, have you noticed? The choice to forgive happens here, and the choice to love happens here. When you fall in love with character. You see, feelings go up and down like the wind, but the choice to forgive, the choice to love is strong, and the feelings go like this. That's why arranged marriages work. My sister-in-law was an arranged marriage. She's a model now. She's a very beautiful girl. She's 40, looks 20, because she lives this life. When she was 14, her mother went to my husband Michael and said, I want your brother to marry my daughter. She's Portuguese. Now, Michael's brother was 26 at the time, and Abigail was 14. And so Michael went to his brother Jared and said, hey, Grace wants you to marry Abigail. And Jared went, yeah? She's a beautiful girl. And Grace the mother came to Michael's brother and said, you can have her at 16. I want her to have a house. And Jared said, righto. And when you talk to Abigail, she was told at 14 that she was going to marry Jared. And she just looked at him and she just loved him. You see, love is a choice. Now, she's a model now. She models all over the place. She's a very beautiful girl. And Michael went to her and said, Abigail, I'm worried about my brother. You're going to get propositioned. She said, don't worry about it, Michael. It's been happening all my life and I'm not interested. I only know they want one thing. And in one of the photo shoots, she was asked to kiss a man. She said, I will not. And they said, excuse me. She said, I've kissed one man in my life and I will never kiss another. They've never met a model like it. You see, love is a choice. And that love can be fed and made more beautiful. Or it can be killed, it can be slaughtered, it can be maimed, it can be wounded. That's why you have to be careful on those words. Do you remember that psalm I said? Psalm 39, verse 1. I will take heed to my ways that I err not with my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle. What's the bridle? The bridle is the frontal lobe. And if all of that's going into the body, you will have a compromised frontal lobe and words will come out that should never, ever come out. Oh, how many words have been said that should never have been said. Your words affect your feelings, so be cautious on your words. The fourth law states that your words reveal your feelings, and you can't let them all out. Proverbs 29:11 says, the fool utters all his mind, but the wise man keeps it until afterwards. Another proverb, it's Proverbs 17:27, it says, even a fool when he holds his peace is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. But some things need to be said, granted, but don't say them until this is in control. But I'm upset. We'll go for a run. But I need to say what I feel. Go and chop some wood. Go and have a cold shower. Don't speak until frontal lobe is once again in control. What's the old saying? If you can't think of anything nice to say, say nothing. My grandmother used to say, whistle, sing. Colossians 4 verse 6 states, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. You see, God communicates with mankind right here. And he will help you strengthen that bridle. God is not in every man. You would never say God was in Hitler, Mugabe, Stalin. No. God gave mankind the choice. And the choice is here. Can you see how the enemy of souls loves humans to take this in so they can't communicate correctly with God? God gave mankind the choice. Your words reveal your feelings, so be cautious on your words. The fifth law is the law of adaptation. And the law of adaptation states that we have a soft-wired brain. Do you know it's only the last 10 years science has acknowledged our brain is soft-wired? They always thought we had a hard-wired brain. And what medicine is saying now, they call it neuroplasticity. Neuro meaning nerve cells, plasticity. When you melt plastic, it moulds to the shape of whatever you put it to. But the proverb talked about it thousands of years ago. There's two proverbs that talk about neuroplasticity. One is Proverbs 13 verse 20. It says, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools will be destroyed. Because of the law of adaptation. The other law is Proverbs 22:24. Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man thou shalt not go, lest thou learn his ways and get a snare for thy soul. Because of the law of adaptation. Because of the law of adaptation, our brain has the ability to grow, and our brain has the ability to shrink. So I'm going to give you a terrible growing scenario and a wonderful growing scenario. Then I'm going to give you a terrible shrinking scenario and a wonderful shrinking scenario. Have you heard the story of the fish that got away? Every time the story is told, what happens to the fish? It gets bigger and bigger. Every time we relate painful past, if we're relating it daily or regularly, what's happening to it? It's getting bigger and bigger. We had a man do our program, man and his wife. He was in his late 60s, and he tells the story that he was captured by the Viet Cong at the age of 23. Most of his company was killed. He was put in a cage 1 metre by 1.5 metres, and he was in that cage for 14 months. But he said the worst part was they killed his best mate in front of him over 2 days. What they would do is they'd pick up that cage and carry it everywhere. And he said his clothes rotted off him after a few months. They'd go into villages and all the children would poke sticks at him. He said for some reason he can't understand it, but from time to time his body would go very cold and he would just sleep. And he thinks they thought he was dead. So after 14 months, he woke up one day after he'd been in this cold sleep for just even half an hour, and he noticed he was by himself. They had left him. He was in that cage for I think another day, and he heard a helicopter, and it was the Americans, and they came in. But when they got him out of the cage, they couldn't unbend him because he was locked up in that state. They took him to hospital, and little by little they had to put him on traction and start to stretch his body out. I said, how did you survive? Mentally, he said, I'm a Christian. He said, I dialogued with God. God kept my mind. But there's one thing he wouldn't let God have. He had great bitterness and anger towards the men that had killed his best mate. And his wife said to me, he relates the story every day. I can't stand it. Can you see what he was doing? He was keeping that wound fresh. It's like having a wound and every day you knock it again and you open it again and you open it again. He was keeping that wound open. It had grown. And what was growing in his brain? Thorns. Many thorns were growing through his brain. And he was getting all sorts of diseases happening to him. So what's the wonderful growing scenario? I'll tell you the rest of the story in a minute. What's the wonderful growing scenario? A.A. Milne, the poet, said the world is full of so many things, we all should be as happy as kings. There are so many things that we can learn and discover. Can you play a musical instrument? You should. I met a man here last night. He's not here tonight. He said, I'm a musician. He looked like he was 70s. I said, what do you play? He said, oh, just about everything. Mostly the trumpet. Learning a musical instrument is a wonderful way for brain growth. Let me show you the part of the brain that grows. We have 1 trillion nerve cells, and every time we learn something new, we develop another dendrite. We develop another dendrite, another dendrite, another dendrite, another dendrite. One nerve cell has the ability to develop 70,000 dendrites. That's phenomenal. The capacity of this brain is phenomenal. And the tragedy is most people go through their whole life never accessing the full potential of their brain. Isn't that tragic? You can be developing new dendrites right up until the day you die. So learning a musical instrument. I'd like you to spend the next 24 hours choosing your instrument. Okay? Triangles out. Recorder. Mouth organ. If you learned as a child, I assure you, the pathways are still there. You'll revive them very quickly. Learning another language is also a fantastic way at developing new dendrites. Learning new skills, whether it's skiing or skating or cycling or sword fighting or belly dancing or painting or pottery. I love knitting and sewing and I love cooking. My husband's not interested in any of those things, but he learnt to fly a helicopter about 6 years ago. He developed a lot of dendrites there. In fact, he learnt to fly the Bell 47. So there's 5 different things you're doing at once. The left foot, the right foot, the left hand, and the right hand's doing 2 things at once. Wow. He said learning to hover is like trying to stay on a slippery rubber ball. And his teacher said, I'm warning you. He said, in your 50s, it's very difficult to learn this. His teacher said, I have 2 men in their 50s, one's up to 60 hours, one's up to 80 hours, they still can't get it. He said, the young ones get it in 20 hours. Michael got it in 20 hours. He was astonished. How many 50-year-olds does he meet who don't do any of that? Who are going to bed early, drinking their water, nourishing food, exercising? There is a formula. And you will never get to brain excellence without first implementing those physical laws. That's the good news. Memorizing. Memorising the Bible, it's one of my favourite things to do. It is such fun. I have no talent there. I just spend a lot of time on it. I work on it. I work on it and I try and learn a verse a week. If I learn more than that, it all gets jumbled up in my mind. I go over it and over it and over it and over it. Yes, I think it has to have at least 21 visits before I've got a strong pathway. Sometimes I can not say it for 6 months and then I can just bring it up because I've got the pathways there. You see that? You establish those pathways and they're solid in the brain. When I was a child, I learnt Scottish dancing. I'm a 5th generation Scottish descent. I learnt the cuts, which is jumping once and hitting the back of your calf twice with each jump. I can do that like that. And yet I get other people to do it. No one can do it. It's because I learned it as a child. And they're called the cuts. You do it in the sword dance. Now I can do it. I cannot do it for 12 months and then just stand there and do it like that. Just 1 jump and 2 hits. If I didn't have all this equipment on me, I might demonstrate. They're just skills. So you can develop so many skills. You don't have to learn the cuts. Most people with memorising give up when they're nearly there. I'll be memorising something for 4 days and I'll try and remember it in the morning and I can't. It's at that point most people give up. When you've almost climbed the mountain, do you stop when you're almost there? Because that's when you're the most tired. No, you keep going. You keep going. I'm like a dog at a bone. I'm at it and at it till I've got it. And I love it because when I'm counselling people, I can share beautiful verses from the Bible, beautiful quotes. Because in Australia, if you say, look, I've just got a nice Bible verse here, they're out the door. But if you can actually incorporate through what you're saying and keep eye-to-eye contact, I find that it touches their heart. 2 of my favourites are Isaiah 26 verse 3. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, he whose mind is stayed upon thee, because he trusteth in thee. And another one is 1 Peter 5, and I'll start at 6. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due season, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Be sober, be vigilant, knowing that your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, roameth around, seeing whom he can devour. Whom resist, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. But the God of all grace, who hath called you unto his eternal glory, after that ye have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, settle you. Beautiful words. But that would have taken me a few months to learn that. But now that it's solid in my mind, I can just bring it out. So start tomorrow, but don't learn too much at once. You'll get bamboozled and give up. So that's the wonderful growing scenario. Our brain can ever be developing new pathways right up till the day we die. Well, what's the terrible shrinking scenario? If you don't use your brain cell, you will lose it. It's scary, eh? So this is not negotiable. You've got to learn a musical instrument. You've got to start memorising. You've got to start learning new skills. So what's the wonderful shrinking scenario? When we forgive everyone who has ever hurt us in our life, we turn painful past to dust. And dust cannot hurt you. There's no bad smell to draw you down there anymore, so the memory, the pathway to that memory actually shrinks. Isn't that good news? We never forget. Of course we never forget, but it need not be part of our everyday lives. That's what forgiveness does. And Dr. Carolyn Leaf, in her book, Who Switched Off My Brain, she goes one step further. She shows that in the brain there are little vacuum cleaners. They're called glial cells. And glial cells are more numerous than brain cells. The smallest cell in the human body is the sperm cell. The second smallest cell is the glial cell. Now let's say right now, on the way home, we each forgive everyone who has ever hurt us, ever misunderstood us, ever abused us in our life. Then when we lay our head on the pillow, hopefully by about 10 to 10, the glial cells are activated. And they come along and they vacuum clean up the thorns. Science shows us now that forgiveness has a physiological effect in the brain to cleanse and detox the brain. So it need not be part of your everyday life. The man that had been in the cage, I talked to him. I said, "Can you forgive the men that killed your mate?" He said, "No." I said, "Can you consider this, that in the Viet Cong, if they were told to torture and kill a man and they said no, then their families were tortured and killed?" I said, "Can you consider that?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Forgive those men." He did. He didn't want to, he didn't feel like it, but he did. And his wife told me that he never related the story again. Isn't that amazing? And now science shows us when he forgave, what happened in his brain. The vacuum cleaners came along and they cleaned it all up. One lady said she could forgive her rapist by seeing him as a little boy who was raped. Whatever it takes. The consequences of their crime is not our business. That's God's business. And there's a verse in the Bible where God says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." And so leave it with him. He'll do a better job. Okay? Our job is to forgive. Our job is to let it go. Number 7, the final law is the law of diversion. And the law of diversion states that when something is so firmly denied as to refuse any hope for it, the brain has the ability to divert to other pursuits. Use it on yourself. We all get no's in life, don't we? We all get told things that we don't want to happen and we don't want to happen. But when you accept it and you basically look around for what pathway is going to open up, the brain can do that. The brain has been designed to do that. The old saying is, when God closes one door, he opens a window. Have you heard that saying? My son James, at the age of 13, said, "Mum, sometimes the window's bigger than the door." I think we can all testify to that. Some of the hardest things that we've had to go through in our life, we look back and they've been stepping stones to greater things happening in our life. That the trials in your life not be rocks to crush you, but stepping stones to greater things. The Italians say, we say when God closes one door, he opens two. Let me finish on a quote. And this quote is from a book that's called Counsel on Diet and Food, and it's about page 30. Right physical habits promote mental superiority. Intellectual power, physical strength, longevity depend upon immutable laws. There's no happen so no chance about this matter. Nature's God will not interfere to preserve men from the violation of nature's law. There is much sterling truth in the adage, every man and every woman is the architect of their own fortune. We don't choose what happens to us, but we choose the way we respond or react to what happens to us. If we say it's great, it will be. If we say it's terrible, it will be. What I have endeavoured to do tonight is to inspire you to look differently at your life, to inspire you to have a look at the fact that today is the first day of the rest of your life, because life should be good, no matter what your age, no matter who you are. And life should be getting better with age, smarter and brighter. This means that no one in this room need ever get Alzheimer's, because you now know how to prevent it. Isn't that good? So thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you. And maybe, God willing, I'll be able to come back and see you again in another year.